On a hot afternoon, the sun shone fiercely in the cloudless sky, blanketing the expanse of rice fields with scorching heat. The wind blew softly, occasionally shaking the fresh green leaves of the rice fields, but not enough to dispel the oppressive heat. In the middle of the vast rice fields, an old farmer with dark skin due to sunburn walked slowly between the rice fields, carrying a basket of fertilizer in his hand. His face looked tired, but his determination remained strong. Sweat poured from his forehead, dripping down his rough cheeks and disappearing into the folds of his clothes that were already wet from sweat. With experienced hands, he took a handful of fertilizer from his basket and scattered it with skillful movements, ensuring that every part of the rice field received enough nutrients to grow well. In the distance, the sound of crickets and the gurgling of irrigation water flowing from a small river became the background sound that accompanied his work. Occasionally, sparrows flew low, as if observing his movements from a distance, looking for the remains of seeds that might be hidden in the soil. His steps were careful, avoiding the puddles of water between the rice field bunds so as not to slip. Despite the scorching heat, the farmer did not complain. For him, this was part of his life, part of his efforts to ensure that his harvest would be abundant later. He knew that his hard work today would bear sweet fruit when the harvest season arrived, when the grains of rice turned yellow and were ready to be harvested. In the vast expanse of rice fields, the wind occasionally rustles, shaking the leaves of the 2-month-old rice fields. This is the right time for a farmer to carry out the second fertilization, an important stage in caring for rice plants so that they grow well, green, and produce full grains later on. In the middle of the green expanse, an old farmer walks slowly on the rice field embankment. His face is full of sincerity, his steps are steady even though sweat is pouring down his body. On his shoulder hangs a large bucket filled with a mixture of urea and Ponska fertilizers. This mixture is the key to the growth of denser and greener rice, helping the plants absorb nutrients better so that their stems are sturdy and their leaves are fresher. With deft hands, he scoops a handful of fertilizer from his bucket. The white powder and pink granules are perfectly mixed, ready to be spread among the stalks of rice that are starting to grow taller. With practiced movements, the farmer spreads it evenly, ensuring that every inch of the rice field gets enough fertilizer. He knows very well that this fertilization must be done carefully. Too much can damage the plants, too little can make them lack nutrients. Around him, the expanse of rice looks fresh, its leaves are starting to get wider and turn bright green. This is a sign that the plants are growing well, but still need further care. The mixture of urea and Ponska fertilizers is expected to further accelerate growth and strengthen the plants so they are ready for the next harvest season. With deft hands, he scoops a handful of fertilizer from his bucket. The white powder and pink granules are perfectly mixed, ready to be spread among the stalks of rice that are starting to grow taller. With practiced movements, the farmer spreads it evenly, ensuring that every inch of the rice field gets enough fertilizer. He knows very well that this fertilization must be done carefully. Too much can damage the plants, too little can make them lack nutrients. Around him, the expanse of rice looks fresh, its leaves are starting to get wider and turn bright green. This is a sign that the plants are growing well, but still need further care. The mixture of urea and Ponska fertilizers is expected to further accelerate growth and strengthen the plants so they are ready for the next harvest season. He continued to walk between the rice plants that stood upright with stalks that were starting to grow sturdy. The age of the rice plants had now reached 2 months, and it was time for farmers to do the second fertilization. This is an important stage in the cultivation process, where plants need additional nutrients to grow stronger and produce full grains when the harvest season arrives. Sweat dripped from his forehead, wetting his face, which was already full of lifelines, while his agile hands continued to spread the white grains between the plants with trained movements. This time, fertilization could not be done carelessly. The farmer had to ensure that the fertilizer was evenly distributed so that all plants received sufficient nutrients. He paid close attention to the distance and dosage used, following the experience and knowledge he inherited from previous generations. Every handful of fertilizer he spread was a hope for his future harvest. Around him, the young rice fields that were now starting to produce wider leaves looked fresh despite the heat. Their roots began to grip deeper into the soil, absorbing water and substances needed for their growth. The wind that blew occasionally shook the stems, as if providing coolness for the farmers who were working hard. From a distance, the sound of gurgling irrigation water flowed through small channels, bringing life to thirsty plants. Several sparrows perched on the rice stalks, looking for food among the wet grains of soil. The farmer occasionally looked up at the sky, making sure the weather remained friendly so that the fertilizer he had spread could be absorbed properly without being wasted by sudden rain. Time goes by, but the farmer's spirit does not diminish. He knows that his hard work today will determine the results he gets in the next few months. This second fertilization is one of the important steps that should not be missed. He believes that with attention and perseverance, his rice fields will produce abundant harvests. Spreading urea fertilizer mixed with Ponska fertilizer during the day when the sun is shining brightly and the dew on the rice leaves has dried is a strategy that has long been applied by experienced farmers. They understand very well that the time and method of fertilization greatly affect the effectiveness of nutrient absorption and the health of rice plants. Urea fertilizer contains high nitrogen, which is very much needed by plants for their vegetative growth. However, the nitrogen in urea is quite volatile if exposed to direct sunlight or if applied in inappropriate conditions. Therefore, farmers choose the time during the day after the dew has dried to avoid the risk of fertilizer sticking to leaves that are still wet. If fertilizer sticks and dissolves on the leaves, especially urea, then there is a possibility that it will cause a burning effect, which is indicated by yellowing or even wilting leaves. When I asked the farmer why the fertilizer was spread during the day when the sun was hot, the farmer answered, "The choice of time during the day is also based on the condition of the soil, which is no longer too moist due to morning dew. If fertilizer is spread in the morning when dew is still attached or when the soil is too wet, there is a risk that the fertilizer will be easily washed away or not optimally absorbed by the plant roots. By waiting until noon, farmers ensure that the fertilizer can come into direct contact with the soil and immediately dissolve with the next watering or rain, so that the absorption of nutrients by plants becomes more effective. The experience and local wisdom of farmers in determining the time of fertilization is part of a farming strategy that has been proven effective for years. They not only rely on fertilizer as a source of nutrients for plants, but also understand how and when to use it properly so that it does not have a negative impact on plant growth. This is one form of traditional wisdom that continues to be passed down from generation to generation in the world of agriculture. The farmer had been in the rice field since morning when the sun began to show its rays on the eastern horizon, driving away the remaining dew that was still stuck to the rice leaves. The air was still cool, and the expanse of green rice fields stretched wide. This morning he had prepared himself on the rice field embankment, carrying a small hoe and sickle in his hand. He knew that fertilization could not be done just like that in the morning. Dew that was still stuck to the leaves and soil that was still too wet could cause the fertilizer to be washed away before it could be absorbed by the plant roots. Therefore, while waiting for the afternoon, he decided to weed the wild grass that grew between his rice plants. With great patience, he bent down, pulling out one by one the grass that could interfere with the growth of the rice. Every now and then, he wiped the sweat that was starting to pour down his forehead. For farmers, weeding is not just a routine job, but also part of the effort to care for the plants so that they can grow well without interference from weeds that can absorb nutrients from the soil. The sun was getting higher, and the dew that was still visible earlier began to evaporate slowly. The soil was no longer too wet, indicating that the long-awaited moment was almost here. After making sure the land was free of weeds, the farmer took the sack of fertilizer that he had prepared since morning. With steady steps, he began to spread the fertilizer evenly, making sure that each grain fell directly to the ground so that it could easily dissolve and be absorbed by the plant roots. He smiled with satisfaction at the sight of his neatly arranged rice fields, with rice growing well under the midday sun. In his heart, he hoped that his efforts today would yield good results, providing an abundant harvest as a reward for his hard work and perseverance in caring for the land. For him, every day in the rice fields was a devotion to nature, and every drop of sweat that fell was an investment for the future. After several hours of non-stop work, he paused for a moment, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his shabby sleeve. He looked at his rice field with hope. Although tired, there was a certain satisfaction in his heart. With an undying spirit, he continued his work, spreading fertilizer one handful after another, fertilizing the soil that was the source of his life. After several hours of work, he finally finished fertilizing the entire field. He stood for a moment, looking at his rice field that was now filled with new nutrients. With satisfaction, he let out a long sigh, feeling relieved that he had done his job well. Now, he could only wait and continue to care for his plants until the time came to harvest the results of his hard work. With slow steps, the farmer left his rice field, carrying great hope in his heart. He believed that with proper fertilization and careful care, the rice he planted would grow greener, more fertile, and produce an abundant harvest in the coming season. That's all the stories in the rice fields today. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.